You're live.
Thank you. Okay, so good evening, everyone. We're going to give it just another minute or so as individuals are joining our webinar. Okay. So we're slowing down a little bit. Okay, so it looks like our attendees have slowed down a little bit, so I think we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Barbara Russell, and I serve as the superintendent here in Perkiomen Valley. And this evening, we'd like to share some information with you about what we've been considering with regard to our special education students. And I'd like to introduce the esteemed panelist group that we have here with us tonight. So we have Dr. Kim Boyd, and you can see us on the screen, but we can't see you. And Dr. Boyd is our Director of Special Education. And we have Ms. Jonah Ducci, who is a special education supervisor serving the high school primarily. We also have Mrs. Amanda Christofko, who is supporting at the middle level and the elementary level as a special education supervisor, and also Dr. Erin Gibbons, who is serving in a similar capacity, special education supervisor for elementary and middle levels. And we have Mrs. Sandy Shady, who serves as an inclusion facilitator for the school district and supports teachers primarily as they work with our special education students and all students in the classroom to do the best that we can do and make sure learning is happening. So I appreciate all of them joining, and I appreciate all of you joining. So here's our purpose for this evening's meeting. There's a lot going on. There are a lot of conversations happening about reopening schools. And we really have some different considerations that we are making as a team when it comes to our special education students. And we wanted to talk to you a little bit tonight about some of the reopening plans and then how we're planning to reacclimate our special education students back into the school setting, if that's indeed where we land. And then also, how do we get back on track and engage our special education students in new learning, no matter which instructional model we may adopt as a school district in the fall. And you probably are aware that this Thursday, July 30th, there is a special topic board meeting when our board will talk about all that needs to be considered as we prepare to reopen for the 2021 school year. And they'll talk about a health and safety plan that's required of the school district, must be board approved, and also approved by the Department of Education. They'll also look at the possibility of approving either a traditional, hybrid, or virtual instructional model, or even some combination thereof. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through our presentation here. But we really want you to know that we're thinking about your special education children, your students, and we want to hear from you. So you have an opportunity tonight to voice questions, maybe share some comments about some of what you hear in the Q&A feature, or in the chat feature. And we'll be monitoring and try and address the questions that you posed tonight as we move through. But we really wanted to have a separate conversation with all of you, because I'm thinking that for many of us, the questions will be different from some of the other community messages that we've had. So we are thinking about 3 different instructional models for the fall, and we do have a link on our homepage that will take you to all presentations, all communication, all information connected to COVID-19 and preparing to reopen our schools. So there's lots of this information and background information available on our website from the homepage if you're interested. We've talked about this in some other settings. I just want to very briefly go over where we are in our thinking right now. We've talked about bringing our students back in a traditional model, and that means all students in schools, the physical setting, 5 days a week, versus a hybrid model, which is really a combination of that traditional model. So students spend some days in school, and the virtual model, meaning they spend some days remote, learning remotely, similar to what they did in the spring in that they were learning from home. But I'll talk about some of the differences that we are incorporating into the design of any kind of virtual learning in the fall. So this illustration just depicts in a little bit more detail what each of those different instructional models actually means for students. And you may have responded to a survey where you expressed your preference for one of these. That was a question that was asked of parents. So let's just talk very briefly. I mentioned traditional learning is the normal we know. Students are on site in school. And in the upcoming school year, no matter which instructional model we adopt, our board approves. Our students will be expected to wear masks and/or face shields and socially distance. And the masks really represent a requirement and order that was handed down by Governor Wolf, and are intended to protect the student, him or herself, wearing the mask, as well as those around him or her. So we will be enforcing masks. Now, certainly, if a student has a medical condition that represents an exemption to wearing a mask, we will certainly uphold that. And then we're making some different accommodations so that that student maintains that social distance. Without a mask, right now, the recommendation is that we maintain that 6 feet of social distance, and we're obligated to uphold that in our schools. For the most part, we're predicting our students will be wearing masks, and they can be cloth masks. You have some flexibility there in the type of face covering. Technically, that's the correct term. Face covering or mask that your child wears to school. It can be a cloth one. It does not have to be a sophisticated medical one. We will have these on hand for students who may not have them. Again, if we're in the school setting and maybe you're purchasing some that have been made available through different fundraisers. If we're back in a traditional setting, and I say if, because I do have some reservations about that traditional instructional model, we'll certainly limit the use of large group spaces like cafeterias, auditoriums for assemblies, large groups in a choral room, etc. Because that's the recommendation, that we keep those numbers low and we avoid bringing a lot of students together to the degree it's possible. Masks, face coverings help a lot. That's still the recommendation. So a lot of things to think about as we consider health and safety. And I've shared some of these pictures before. This is what a classroom looks like with desks separated by 6 feet. And that really helps us to uphold that social distancing guideline. We'll post this presentation on our website, but it gives you some of the details of some of the PPE that we're considering, that protective equipment. And we're, in addition to requiring face coverings for our students and our staff, purchasing some plexiglass dividers for small group instruction, for welcome desks in main office areas or library desks in the library to provide some additional protection, since there's a lot of interactions at those counters, at those tables, whether it's a main office or a library. In small group instruction, sometimes we're envisioning plexiglass to provide some additional protection to our students that may be seated at a table versus their individual desk. Lots of hand sanitizer. And we're focused on educating our students about the ways we need to think going into this new school year. And those ways are really different from ways of the past. So not only will our students and staff be wearing face coverings and maintaining a healthy social distance, there will be plexiglass around. There will also be lots of hand sanitizer and encouraging of our students to wash their hands frequently. And we'll be doing extra cleaning in our buildings, high touch surface areas. And we have updated some protocols so that we're really focused on that in the new year, cleaning restrooms midday as well as after school. So focused on that cleaning, that disinfecting of our buildings. Over here, you can see that there are some other aspects to the health and safety planning that right now we're thinking about. And we will encourage students to keep their belongings to themselves and personal to them. So no sharing of food or drinks, and water fountains will be turned off. We'll encourage students to bring water, or we'll provide it in coolers with some disposable cups. And we're hoping that for the most part, every one of our students has access to his or her own Chromebook to use. That's our goal. We may be a little short at the beginning of the year, but our goal is to make sure every student has access to a device, and then maybe that device can be quote unquote their device, their resource, similar to a textbook that they would be assigned. We want to limit sharing as much as possible. And whenever we move through hallways or situate ourselves in cafeterias, we'll do so in a way that maintains that healthy distance. One of the strategies we've learned mitigates the spread of the virus, and that's really what grounds and serves as the foundation for these different classroom strategies and guidelines that we're now following. We want to mitigate the spread of the virus. We'd like to get our kids back in school. We want to mitigate the spread of the virus while we do so. So just some more pictures of some of the considerations we're making and what it looks like. We also have face shields in addition to face coverings that can also offer an added layer of protection. And this would be a divider that might exist between a small group of students, again, providing that additional protection. So we're familiar with traditional learning. It's the learning we know. It's the school that we know. We've also talked about virtual learning, and we've experienced that in the spring. And what I have learned from parents is that this was really hard. Virtual learning for a lot of students, whether they are special education students or regular education students, it didn't matter. It was a dramatic shift, and it proved to be really challenging. So this time around, any level of virtual learning is something we're focusing on to improve upon. But we want to talk to you about this tonight. We've got some ideas on how we might support our students more effectively than in the spring, and I'm thinking you probably have some ideas too. There's a good chance there will be some amount of virtual learning in the upcoming year. I don't know how much, and I'm not 100% certain, but we're preparing ourselves for that. So in a virtual instructional model, students don't report to school at all. However, we are thinking about bringing in our special education students on some differing schedules. We recognize that to support them as effectively as we can with their academics, with their socialization, with their emotional development, behavioral development, it happens best in school. So we're thinking about, even if we would be virtual as a district, and that's a possibility, we would want to bring our special education students into the school setting in small groups. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But on the surface, broadest definition of virtual learning is that students are learning remotely. They're at home. Now, as part of the virtual learning, we can break that down and talk about the possibilities for synchronous and asynchronous learning, small group instruction, large group instruction. We do intend to provide more small group instruction in any amount of virtual learning we offer in the fall. So we have resources, we have the tools that will allow us to break our students down into small groups or convene them as small groups and target their instruction, provide their intervention, or check in and see how they're doing. We're very concerned with the social and emotional needs of our students, and we want to be especially attentive to those needs and connecting with our students again. It's been 6 months since our students have been in school, and it'll be even longer by the time the school year gets underway. We want to make sure that we pay attention to the social and emotional aspects of our students and tap into them to help them get back on track. And if we're able to fill some voids that may have developed over this long break, that's what we want to do. So that's blinking bright on the radar screen. We're also focused on how we support them in learning. Again, in any amount of virtual learning, it will be more targeted in the fall. So we'll chunk that learning, we'll break it down and present it in smaller portions with breaks so that students are more apt to actually realize the learning. In a virtual learning model, and we're calling it Virtual Voyage 2.0, there will be that regular grading and attendance taking because we expect students to attend classes in a virtual setting in the fall, just as they would attend classes at a certain time in a traditional instructional model. So I just want to call out again and emphasize that we're thinking differently about the spring virtual learning here in the green column and the blue virtual learning, which really represents some of the qualities of the virtual learning we're planning for in the fall. Again, to whatever degree that may be occurring for our students. They will be expected to attend and be present for a class. There will be grading of the work that they complete and the assessments that they take. And there will be synchronous and asynchronous learning. We could talk a little bit more about that. This is an example, and again, I don't want to spend a lot of time and get into the weeds. What's really important for you to take away is that students will be scheduled to be in a certain class at a certain time for a certain amount of time. That's different from the spring. So our students will be moving through a schedule that mirrors the schedule they would otherwise move through if they were in the building, attending in a traditional manner. So for the elementary level, this is a sample schedule, what it might look like for them. And the morning meeting here, that's a focus. That's a focus to support our students socially and emotionally as they're reconnecting with teachers and with their peers in this virtual setting. Here's an example of a secondary schedule. And again, you see the flow of the class periods, and they align to the times that we're familiar with for our secondary level students. So they would move through these class periods. Now, you may notice that the time here is a little bit shorter than a regular class period. And we're thinking about the screen time we're exposing our students to and actually raising some questions about that, trying to strike the right balance. So it may be that students are connecting with their teacher and maybe some of the students in their class for some amount of time in that class period. And then for some amount of time, maybe working on practice problems, for example, in math, or maybe a project. with another student in a partner, or maybe they're working as part of a small group. So you'll see we're still teasing out some of these times because we're thinking about the amount of screen time. We don't want students sitting in front of a computer all day, every day. That's not the intent. However, we do want to deliver instruction. We do want to be more structured and routine with their schedule and have teachers instructing them in ways that they're familiar with, but not 100% of the time that they're in school. I mentioned synchronous and asynchronous learning, and I think most of us experienced primarily asynchronous learning in the spring. And that, I think, to a large degree is what made virtual learning in the spring really challenging, because asynchronous learning sometimes can feel like independent learning, and we don't want that for the fall. So we're really focused on more synchronous learning, where again, your children would be with a teacher or with a paraprofessional, maybe reviewing something that was previously taught by a teacher, but that opportunity to actually have a teacher instruct and not necessarily be working on assignments or projects independently or away from a teacher. That's asynchronous. So we've laid out some models here. So we have a couple different virtual options. We're focused, I'm talking about this first column right here, PVSD Virtual Voyage 2.0. And these are some of the characteristics. So when you maybe take some time to review this presentation, this is the column that you want to refer to. We have a previously existing virtual school. We have a very small number of our students that participate in it. This Virtual Voyage 2.0 will be instruction that's delivered by our teachers following our curriculum. So when I talk about that virtual instructional model, it's this first column I'm focusing on, and I'll ask you to do the same. You may be familiar with some cyber charter schools. They exist out there. They are also considered public schools, and some of those charter schools are cyber charter because they only offer virtual learning experiences. And I'd like you to know that we can do the same thing. We have actually two options. I'm encouraging this first column here, and that's the virtual instruction we'll deliver. And overall, Perkiomen Valley tends to do much better in terms of supporting its students with learning than a lot of our cyber charter schools. They exist out there though, and some of you have asked some questions about those. The hybrid model is the most confusing and complex. Logistically, it's very challenging. And it's somewhere in between that traditional model, school we know, and that fully virtual model. And the hybrid's really a combination where we break our students down into smaller groups and bring them into the school setting some days a week and offer virtual learning the other days of the week. So one of the concerns that I have is bringing back into the buildings the full enrollments of our students right away. My suggestion is that we start with a hybrid and we have students in school a couple days a week. We reduce the enrollments by about half and they split their time in school with remote. And certainly the virtual side of the hybrid provides some flexibility. When we create the schedules for when students are in school, we are focused on keeping siblings in school on the same days. And we're working again very closely with our teachers to be prepared for this model. So the hybrid model incorporates that traditional sort of learning that we know with the virtual learning we continue to try and get better at, because we anticipate there will be some amount of virtual learning in the fall. So this illustration helps us to see a hybrid involves students spending some time in school and some time at home at all levels, K through 12. That's the proposal. So to get into a little bit more detail about that, we would break our students, we would divide them up into a group A and a group B in all of our schools. And we're looking at doing that either based upon their last name or their transportation zone. So we're connecting it to busing in an effort to be efficient. We want to make sure though that no matter which system we go with, and our principals are really looking very carefully at both, we want to try and balance the students and make sure that we do the best that we can with decreasing those enrollments and decreasing the number of students in a building at one time. But regardless of whether students as part of that hybrid are in school, if I'm in group A, I'm coming to school Monday and Thursday. If I'm in group B, I'm coming to school Tuesday and Friday. And Wednesday is a day where we would alternate. Week 1, group A would come. The following week, group B would attend. So we'll alternate on that Wednesdays, and we're also thinking about affording our teachers some professional development time on that Wednesday. You know, we may change that. We may propose something a little bit different in how that time is allotted on Wednesday. There is a lot of new teaching and learning that's happening, and we want to make sure we offer the quality service, the highest quality service we are able. And part of that means working with our teachers. So there may be some time on Wednesdays that's also allotted to our teachers to focus in that way, to make sure the experiences these other days are as strong as they can be. You see the phrase live streaming here. And when we think about live streaming, what that actually means is that if I'm a group A student and I'm in school while my group B peers are at home, so if I have a class of 25 students, I've just divided, and now I have 13 of them in front of me, 12 of them are at home. These students at home, if we live stream, are tuned into the teacher's lesson. So they're listening from a remote location to the instruction provided by the teacher, the directions provided by the teacher, the assignment that's provided by the teacher. They won't have the same level of interaction, but they will hear the instruction and they will have an opportunity to ask questions and participate in some of that small group work. So it doesn't leave them out of what's happening in school. And on the next day, when group B is in the classroom and group A is learning remotely, the same approach will be taken. So that again, we keep our students moving forward at the same pace and afford them all the same instruction. So this is just some additional information about live streaming and asynchronous versus synchronous. I mentioned a little bit about that before. Synchronous really means a teacher is delivering instruction. We're attempting to do that via live stream, where students would be either in the classroom with the teacher, listening to that instruction, being a part of that instruction directly, or remote through Zoom or through a Google Meet. Right now, we're really focused on Zoom. It has some very nice features that support teachers and students. So we're hoping to be able to get that. So we're looking at asynchronous probably one day a week on that Wednesday, and synchronous those other days. So it'll be primarily synchronous, but there will be some asynchronous in a hybrid schedule. So before I talk about IEPs, I just want to kind of bring it together. We have that traditional model, we have that virtual model. Traditional, we're all back in school, the school we know. Virtual, purely virtual, we're all working remotely, 100% virtual. And then we have that hybrid, that combination in the middle. And right now, that's really where I'm focused in thinking about how we might reacclimate our students to school and bring them back into the school environments, at least to start the year. Please know that at any point in the school year, we could be mandated to shift the instructional model, or we could request that, recommend that of our board based upon the data associated with the pandemic. Know that we're prepared for that. So if we start out hypothetically in a hybrid, we could have to shift to a virtual. If we start out in a fully virtual, it may be that we phase students back in using the hybrid model until we get to that traditional model. So a couple of different options, but we're preparing ourselves for any of those different moves in different directions. Okay, so we're thinking a lot about your children, and we're thinking a lot about their IEPs and how we implement their IEPs in the event we have any instructional model different from traditional. And please know that we will uphold the IEPs and afford your children FAPE. We're obligated to do that, and that's our goal. That's what we want to do. And right now we're working on a variety of different supports based on what our students might choose. So it's possible that our board would approve a hybrid model as well as a virtual option. And the choice that you make is personal. And I want you to know that no matter which choice you might make for your child, again, if that's where we land with our board, we're going to support you in either of those choices. I know that in both the hybrid and the virtual instructional models, there are challenges because students aren't in school every day. And we want to afford our special education students the services that their IEP dictates they should be receiving. So their schedule might actually look different, whether we're in hybrid or virtual, than the schedule of other students. Anything that we do with our special education students or any students on site will uphold those safety guidelines, those health and safety guidelines that we keep referring to. We'll probably be holding a lot of IEP meetings virtually, and if there are some adjustments and the need for an IEP team to come together, it could happen virtually. And hopefully that works okay for you with some of the resources that we have to connect us virtually. Any revisions that occur will warrant an IEP team meeting. So our team, that group of individuals that I introduced to you, you probably know some of them, maybe not all of them, but they're working on organizing those IEP team meetings. So here's what we're thinking about. We're thinking about students who receive full-time special education supports or services come to school 5 days a week. And again, whether we're in a hybrid or we're in a virtual, this is what I would like to recommend, that these students come to school 5 days a week to get the services that they would otherwise be receiving in a traditional model. Students who receive supplemental special education supports will attend 4 days a week. So they're going to be in groups A and B, so to speak. They'll come to school Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. They'll follow that hybrid schedule as if they're a participant in both Group A and Group B. And then lastly, our itinerant special education students who are our students who are in primarily regular education classes, they'll follow that hybrid schedule that I described. They'll be a member of Group A or Group B. So they will attend school on site 2 days, remotely those other 3 days. And our teams continue to work on this. You can see the note here. They continue to work on what's best for our students, looking at the data and the IEPs of our individual students. And no matter how we start the school year, we will monitor their progress and make any recommendations that are appropriate based on the data and our progress monitoring. So this is an aspect of our planning right now that I wanted to talk to you about and get a sense of your thoughts on, because it's different from our regular education students in that population. We don't want to overwhelm our students. we want to make sure we acclimate them successfully back into the school setting. So we're interested in your feedback on these ideas around full-time versus supplemental versus itinerant. And I just want to emphasize again that we are emphasizing ourselves focused on social and emotional learning, and recognize that a lot of our students have been without the social interaction they're typically used to. And we want to make sure that we are aware of that and we address it and make sure that those connections with our students are rebuilt, reestablished, if you will, the relationships rebuilt, and we're supporting our students in these areas as well. We'll provide interventions and supports in ways that are similar to what they get in a traditional setting. We'll capitalize on our paraprofessional support people to create small groups. So while a lot of it may be happening virtually on days when they're not in school, if your child falls into one of those categories, there will still be that small group instruction that's targeted to the needs of our individual students. And we'll continue to administer assessments and take advantage of technology and really capitalize on technology resources to the degree that we're able. And Dr. Boyd has also included here some resources for families. So again, this will be posted on our website. From the homepage, you go to that top link that's titled COVID-19, coronavirus COVID-19, and all presentations are there. And she wanted to call out that Tuesday, August 11th, there is an informational session, and this is an advertisement or a flyer that helps you to know what actually will be presented. So it's Carol Clancy. She's the director of the Bureau of Special Education at the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And she's going to provide an overview of some of the key components and guidance that's being provided to schools. So we're following their lead and now sharing that information with all of you to let you know we're really focused on IEP services in the fall. Very uncertain times, unorthodox approaches to school. However, we're really focused and thinking carefully and critically about supporting our special education students and those that have IEPs. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and answer some questions. Would that be okay? Okay, so if it's all right with the group, I'm going to ask these questions aloud. Just nod, panel, if that's okay. Is there a different way? Okay, I'm gonna just read the questions aloud if it's okay, and I may call on one of our other panelists to answer, but I'll do my best to address. Will a face shield be acceptable, or is a mask and face, or is it a mask and face shield? Great question. For most students, a mask or a face covering will be acceptable. We recognize that there will be some cases where it may be more appropriate to actually have a face shield for a student, and even for some of our teachers, as students need to be able to see what our teachers are saying, how they're sounding out letters or sounding out words. That'll mean a little bit more distance, but our preference and what we're requiring is that students wear a mask or a face covering. If there's a medical exemption or some other reason we need to talk about them wearing a face shield, we can talk about that. There will be times when our teachers will wear those face shields so that students can actually see what they're saying. Anything else to add there, anybody? Okay. So I'm just going to go right down the list here. My son has an IEP, but will be in a regular kindergarten class. Does he fall under special education? That's a great question to ask your case manager or one of our supervisors. So I will, since your child is starting kindergarten, I will point you in the direction of Mrs. Christofko here if your child goes to South or Evergreen. And if your child goes to Skipback or Schwenksville, Dr. Gibbons. So you can reach out to either one of them. You can get their email addresses and they can talk you through that and give you a little bit more information specific to your child's IEP. Okay, how does a student who needs modeling and hand over hand help succeed in a virtual setting? Yeah, I think that's a great question. And these are very different times for us in terms of teaching and learning. We are going to avoid touching one another to the degree possible. However, I don't know if anybody from the special ed team can help me out here with any specific strategies that might replace this hand over hand. Anyone have ideas?
Well, Dr. Russell, one thing I'd like to mention is I know these questions came in earlier in the presentation, so I'm not sure, this question may have been posed prior to when we shared about the types of services that we want to provide to students based on the amount of special education services they receive. So a student that typically requires a great deal of support in that hand over hand and that type of modeling might be one of our more intensive students that we are suggesting would come to school. We also do recognize that there may be other circumstances or medical conditions that perhaps prevent families from wanting their children to attend, school within the building. So if a child were to still remain in a virtual setting and require that, if the child, let's say, has adult support, a one-to-one aide or additional adult support in the regular classroom, that aide would likely be present in the virtual classroom and could potentially offer cueing to the student. We've talked about the possibility of breakout rooms where the teacher could work with smaller groups of students and or a paraprofessional could also work with the students so that we could drill down a little bit further and then further customize, I guess, the instruction, so to speak. I don't know if anyone else has other ideas to add to that.
I think we want to do everything that we can to support our students learning in these very different environments. So some of those ideas that Dr. Boyd shared are ones that we'll implement, as well as new ones that come along. I know that we're going to discover some better ways and more effective ways as we continue on this journey. That's what I'll call it, a journey. So the next question is Virtual 2.0 taught by PBSD teachers? Yes, it is. Virtual 2.0 is taught by our teachers, whereas that other PV virtual, and I don't want to be confusing with the different virtual models, but that other model that I didn't speak too much about, and that was intentional, PV virtual, is a different virtual school that's existed for years in our high school that's not taught by PV teachers. So any level of virtual instruction that happens for our students in the fall, whether it's as part of a hybrid or a 100% virtual model, will be delivered by PBSD teachers. And then the question is, if a teacher is delivering instruction in the virtual setting, will they also teach hybrid? We don't think so. However, it may be that if I'm a high school science teacher, I could have some classes hybrid and maybe one class that's virtual. We are thinking about logistically how we group the students to be either hybrid or virtual, and also help separate our teachers out so that, again, they're focusing in a particular way and not overwhelmed with the different strategies and considerations that need to be made in that hybrid model versus that virtual one. And because we don't know exactly where we're going to land yet, we're preparing ourselves really for either direction. So the next question is, what happens with children who are diagnosed with migraines? And I think the same accommodations, particularly if your child has a 504, the same accommodations that were afforded your child in the traditional school setting will be afforded your child in this setting. And again, if a virtual using a computer and that screen time exacerbates those migraines, we would want to bring your child into school when they're feeling healthy enough to come into school. And again, I would encourage you to talk about your case manager once we have a decision about how we're going to reopen schools. And let's tease that out. Let's work that out further. But we'll absolutely support the sort of resources that help your child to be as successful as possible with he or she suffering those migraines. What happens to the children who have a one-on-one or need the one-on-one supports? We're still going to provide those. As Dr. Boyd mentioned, in the school setting, we will still have those support staff people. In the virtual setting, we have the ability in the Zoom resource to break out into smaller groups and interact in a very one-to-one or small group setting. So we will still provide that level of support if your child is eligible for that. What about classes that require labs? That's a great question. We've been posed that question by others. And again, if we're not in school every day, or if we're in a virtual setting, there are lots of virtual labs. It will be different from that hands-on consistently. And we're thinking carefully about what those labs and that lab experience will look like. It will change and be a little bit more virtual in nature. And if we're virtual only, it'll be all virtual in nature. But there are some pretty savvy labs out there that we can access and really observe what happens as we would observe in a lab, very close to that anyway, with some of the virtual resources that exist to help students learn science. So what happens to our children's social, emotional and social development? And I've mentioned that a couple times tonight, and I can't stress enough our concern and focus on that emotional, that social development of our students, and the awareness that we are all trying to have going into the new school year. And again, regardless of the instructional model, that will be a component, that those connections with our kids, reestablishing those, building those relationships, creating that safe environment, and finding ways to help all students be successful, just as we would in a traditional classroom. Those are our goals in these different settings, hybrid or virtual. And what happens to our children that cannot learn virtually? And I would agree, there are students who really struggle to learn virtually. Then we want to talk to you about that and talk about bringing them into the school setting. So our special education students may need specially designed instruction that looks like that. So we'll talk more about that. And I would encourage you to reach out to one of the supervisors here. If you have a high school student, it's Miss Aducci up here that you can reach out to, or your child's case manager. That's fine too. The question is, as I'm reading through the chat, have you discussed or thought how one-on-ones will interact with the students and maintain social distancing? Will they use desk dividers? And thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for your kind words, Mr. Colgan. You know, we've thought about that. How do we help our students realize that social distance, that 6 feet? And I want to offer that it is a recommendation. Our students remain 6 feet apart without masks or more, 6 feet or more. If our students are wearing masks, they can be a little bit closer. One of the ideas that we have is those pool noodles that you see are about 6 feet in length. And if we give some of our students those pool noodles, we don't want them hitting each other with them or playing around in that way, but they might help them realize that distance, that social distance. So I think it's something we're going to have to coach, just like we're going to have to coach our kids to use hand sanitizer, and we're going to have to coach our kids to wash their hands and avoid touching their friends or interacting in that way. And our youngest learners do that. That's very natural for them. We're going to have to coach our kids on keeping that distance. So we're thinking about some different strategies, tape on the floor, those noodles. Our teachers are very creative and they come up with very thoughtful ways to help our students realize things like this. So we're working on that. Okay, if you're asking kids to come into the building for small group services, even if they're virtual, how will those that have immune issues or siblings with immune issues be accommodated? Important question. And again, we would want to, in the case of an immunocompromised situation, one of the recommendations from the Office of Public Health, Montgomery County Office of Public Health, is to wear a mask and a face shield to double up. That provides a extra protection. So we could talk about that. And if that's too stressful, or you feel as if that puts you, your child, your family at too great a risk, then we'll work with you in that virtual environment too, where again, we want the teacher-student interaction to be stronger than it was in the spring. But we do have some ways that we can reinforce with PPE to help safeguard students even more. And one of those ways is doubling up, wearing that face covering, that mask, and the face shield. So we can talk more about that relative to your child. Again, you can reach out to a supervisor or a case manager. What about students who are waiting for evaluations? That's a good question. And I'm going to defer to somebody else here about the timing of that. Can anybody from the team help me to know where we are with the timing of these things and what's happening? Anyone? Do we have a schedule? Do we have a system?
Sure. Again, we were waiting again for the health and safety plan to be approved before we could even consider doing anything through the summer. So we're looking to do potentially, I know we have some early entrance types of things. We have gifted evaluations, those kinds of things, as well as IEP evaluation types of things, MDE evaluations waiting to take place. So we will be prioritizing those. And yes, upon the resumption of the school year, we will pick up evaluations that had been waiting or left waiting upon, from the closure in March. And again, I don't know if the supervisors have anything they'd like to add on to that at all.
We have looked into different face shields. We were already doing a lot of our testing through iPads, which limits the contact between student and the assessor. So additionally, other districts in the county are looking into those things. So we'll be utilizing many of those types of things for it to be the safest possible situation as we can. So I would expect a plexiglass shield, a face shield or a face mask, and a no contact type of evaluation. And as soon as we can start those things, we will.
Very helpful, thank you. Okay, let me move on if it's okay with the group. Would the class be a certain number of students, meaning no more than say 5? So I think the question really is around our small groups and do we have a threshold? Do we have a number that we tend to work around as a minimum or maximum? Special ed, can you help me out there?
I think
Oh, go. Sorry. I can speak from the high school level. When we have that small group setting, we're really looking at students anywhere between 2 students up to 3, 4, or 5 students. So we typically don't like to go over that 5 student threshold. But again, different circumstances bring different things. In addition to that, our groups are already going to be reduced in size within the regular education classroom. If they're physically attending, if they're in a group A and they're physically attending the school building, there's going to be a limited number of students in there. So our small group settings would be able to be reduced as well.
I'd just like to, I'd ask a question or add a clarifying. Ms. Aducci, I don't think that means only 2 to 5 students in a classroom, but 2 to 5 students potentially working in a small group at one time. And again, within the classroom, we're looking to see how many students can be in the actual classroom and still maintain that 6 feet of social distancing. Correct. I know that some of the supervisors have already been in the classrooms, in each of the buildings to look to see what would that look like in terms of, supporting our students, or those classrooms that are largely made up of just special education students. So we have already started to look at that, what that would look like and what the space is that we need accessible so that we can work with our children, as well as have then the adult support that's required or needed in those situations.
So thank you all for sharing in that. Students that have 504 plans, they will be upheld. So again, if there's an accommodation that needs to be met by the school district, then we will do that. And we may have to have some conversation about hybrid versus virtual, but please know we will uphold the accommodations and implement them for any student with a 504. And there's another question about students that are high risk medically. Would they have the option to receive virtual learning? Absolutely, certainly. You know, we really want to provide the best service possible to our special education students. However, I recognize that medically on site may not be what's best. We will work with you in a virtual environment, absolutely. Okay, so somebody is mentioning that I in turn mentioned full-time special education goes 5 days a week, whether they are virtual or hybrid. Does the 4 days a week apply to supplemental special education regardless of virtual or hybrid? Yes, that is the intent. So we would be offering service an additional number of days to our full-time special education students as well as our supplemental. Right now, that's what we're proposing. What happens with 504 accommodations? Please know that they will be implemented, they will be upheld, and we'll work with you based on the circumstances of your child. Okay, so what are the class sizes at the high school level for full-time life skills, and how we have enough space in the classroom to keep the desks 6 feet apart? We are working on that. And again, if students are wearing masks, they don't have to be 6 feet apart all the time. We're doing our best to have those desks as close to 6 feet apart as possible. I don't know the numbers offhand. However, we're requiring the masks, and that gives us a little bit of flexibility with that situation of the desks. But I don't know that we have any life skills classes that are really high in number and would impose upon us being able to do the desks 6 feet apart. Ms. Saducci, do you know that by any chance?
Yes, actually, between the two intensive classrooms, we have a total of 17 students, and we have recently received another intensive classroom teacher to support the high school. So we have 2 classroom teachers, 2 full-size classes to support the intensive, which would be the intensive AS students as well as the life skill students as well. And we're also looking to add in a 3rd neutral area to accommodate for overflow so we can maintain those small groups, improve in our social distance and limit exposure so that we're traveling in smaller groups versus say 8 or 9 within the classroom. So we'll have the 2 classroom settings that we can utilize, as well as we're looking at a 3rd overflow space for small group settings.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Will students with a 504 follow a different schedule than IEP students? They will not necessarily follow the 5-day or 4-day. 504 students, unless there are some extenuating circumstances, 504 students will follow the Group A, Group B schedule. And again, if you have some specific questions about your child, please don't hesitate to reach out to your school counselor in the case of a 504. So another question, would students who stay with their cohort, Group A or B, during the hybrid still be able to receive in-person smaller group direct instruction on the 2 days they are in school? Certainly that's our intent, to make sure that if students tend to receive small group instruction, that they will continue to do that, which is really why we want to bring them in extra days too. We want to make sure that we're offering them the services they're eligible to receive. So we're envisioning small group instruction as part of their experience, yes. Anybody feel differently here? Okay, good. What is procedure for class teaching hybrid for high school if a teacher contracts the virus and is out for an extended period of time? We would most likely bring in a substitute. And if any teacher has to be absent during any year, then we would bring in a substitute. If the question, Mr. O'Malley, is really around contact tracing and what happens in response to someone becoming ill, I think Mrs. Lewis is on our call and she can speak to that. We are following an algorithm, and we have a protocol that we follow in the event there has been a positive case or even test result in the school setting. Let me just see if I can get to Mrs. Lewis and unmute her. Okay, Mrs. Lewis, I let you talk. Anything you want to add to that?
Hi, Dr. Russell and everyone. No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. So we would be, the goal of the school would be to do that home symptom monitoring and the surveillance within the school. And then we would provide the information to the Office of Public Health through our procedures with the contact tracing. And then they would make that decision based on, what the circumstances are, whether someone would need to be quarantined and for the length of time that they would need to be quarantined.
Okay, helpful. And there's a follow-up question, Mrs. Lewis. How will young students who show signs of sickness be handled? Will you require testing each and every time they are sick? Good question. Very practical. What do you think?
That is a good question. And the first thing, because, we also know that, with a return to school, we are going to be hitting upon some allergies and, the flu season will be closely following. So the first, if a student is excluded based on a certain criteria, that symptom criteria that they would have to meet, we would refer them to their primary care provider. Based on that information, the primary care provider would make the decision whether the student needs to be tested or not. They would do their assessment. Is it something else, bacterial, that, an antibiotic? Is the student known to them that they have allergies? So it would really be up to the medical care provider what that decision would be. And they also follow the guidelines of the Office of Public Health in Montgomery County as well. So we'll be working in close connection with parents, with their providers, and with the County Office of Public Health in making those decisions.
Great, thank you again. So we have a couple of questions coming in about if the board does not approve hybrid and instead all students are virtual, is there a way to at least bring students in for their one-on-one services like speech, OT, PT? Yes, we are trying to accommodate that. We are trying to accommodate special education students, bring them into the physical setting, even if all of our students are virtual. So again, we want to support our special education students with the specially designed instruction they're eligible to receive. So that would mean they may come into the physical setting as opposed to just remaining virtual. And there may be times when those services are tele-delivered. There will also be times when they will be delivered in the physical setting. That's our goal, to get our special education students back into the physical setting for the instruction that we believe is most effective when delivered from the physical setting. There's a question about Wilson instruction, and will my daughter be able to receive this for a half an hour? Absolutely. We should be able to do that and resume that in the fall. That'll be part of that small group or one-on-one instruction that we're able to provide either when your child's in school or on a virtual, in a virtual model. So, questions about socially distancing and how will our students who may be challenged with in their social development how will that be handled? And I want parents to know that we view this new set of guidelines as guidelines we have to coach, and we have to help our students understand better. And I'm thinking there's going to be a lot of first graders and second graders who will struggle with social distancing. That's just not natural for our youngest learners. So we are going to work with children and help them to understand that just like they have to brush their teeth every day, we need to keep a distance when we're with our friends at school. And it'll be new learning, and we'll continue to focus on it, but that's the idea. So a question, just to clarify, if the district decides to go hybrid, but we opt to keep the child home, would we need to enroll in PV virtual, and will the IEP be followed? You don't need to enroll in PV virtual. We'll offer you Virtual Voyage 2.0. We'll offer you that virtual model with our teachers, and yes, that IEP will be followed virtually. again, to the degree that it can. Sometimes there are things that need to happen in person. And if there is a concern about bringing a child on site into the physical setting, we'll have to talk through that with your case manager or one of the special ed supervisors. But you do not have to enroll your child into that PV virtual. Your child will remain PVSD, and we'll just offer that virtual experience with the IEP accommodations upheld. Okay, so question about, I've got kids in 3 schools. Will the principals speak with each other to coordinate? We're making every effort to do that so that in a hybrid, students of the same family attend school on those same 2 or 3 days a week. Yes, we're working on that. Okay, the question is, what happens if a student in a classroom is either full attendance or hybrid, confirmed with the virus? What's the fallout for those students coming to school? So I think, Mrs. Lewis, you addressed this.
Yeah, so that
Somebody
again,
is
we would,
confirmed positive.
yeah, so we would work with the Office of Public Health and take the direction from them. And what we would do is outside of each classroom, we'll have a sign-in sheet. So we'll know, you know, any person who enters that classroom at any given time will have to sign in. We'll be able to provide that information and work closely with that Office of Public Health to do that contact tracing.
Thank you. So this next question is an interesting question, and I think it's an important one. So if a special education student is a part of both groups A and B, so that they attend 4 days a week versus just the 2 days a week, wouldn't they be getting the same instruction or activities twice a week as opposed to 4 unique days? Really good question. And actually the idea is no, they would be getting new learning each of those 4 days, so that on Monday, Group A is in a teacher's classroom while Group B is at home getting the same instruction. On Tuesday, that moves forward, and the Group B students are in the classroom while the Group A students are at home. So the curriculum will move forward, because whether I'm in school or at home, the goal is that we're all getting the same instruction so it can continue to move forward. So your child should get that new instruction those 4 or 5 days a week. If a student has an IEP and is part of the gifted program, can they do that virtually? Absolutely. We can uphold gifted or GIEPs, absolutely. For students attending 4 days a week, is transportation available? Yes, we are planning to provide transportation for all of our students. If you have a high school student who's been included in the general education classes with support, that student would be attending via the hybrid model. Would the student need to make changes to his schedule so he could attend 5 days a week, if that's the desire? And this student is actually watching the meeting and listening. So really nice to hear. So that's a good question. Again, we're right now envisioning that learning as moving forward each day of the week, and there would most likely be opportunities for some reinforcement and some review if that student was attending 5 days a week. Anything we want to add there? If Wednesday is an asynchronous day, those alternating weeks, then that's a day where a student could get some individualized small group instruction. That's our vision anyway, that we could support in that way. Is that what we're thinking? Okay. Okay. Okay, so somebody mentioned Springford came out with their virtual plan, and it's asynchronous, but will be recorded, and they can choose whether to join live or watch the recordings. It's up to the families. Is PV considering something like this to offer flexibility? It's a good question. We certainly want to be flexible, and we're trying to figure out how we afford families flexibility. However, we also want that structure and that accountability and responsibility for our students to be in class when it's scheduled. Some of our teachers are comfortable recording their lessons and others are not so comfortable. However, if a student would miss a lesson, our teachers work diligently to get them caught up. So right now, it's not set in stone as part of our protocols that a synchronous lesson will always be recorded. But what we can say is that we will work to get your child caught up if for some reason they miss a lesson, they're not feeling well, or just like they're absent a day from school. So if my child selects all virtual, will there be students from in school coming in and out of the class if that student was in person but then placed in quarantine? It's possible. I mean, we certainly want to work with families. We are suggesting that any changes people want to initiate themselves occur at a marking period or a semester. In your case, it could be that a new student comes into a virtual class because of an occurrence like that. That is possible, yes. And again, we want to hope that our coursework is set up and delivered in a way that makes it fluid for kids in the event we do have to make a change or a transition. Okay, if a child receives services from an outside provider in school during the day, will that still occur? Can that provider still enter the classroom? With the appropriate PPE, that should be fine. Is that correct, team?
Yeah, I'd like to say, Dr. Russell, it is. And then we do also have in our plan, we do have some stricter guidance for those who are coming into our schools, you know, substitutes and the like. They'll not only have to do that symptom monitoring at home that we require, but we'll also do a temperature check and ensure that they have the appropriate PPE before coming into the school.
Okay, great. Okay, so we do have a parent who prefers more asynchronous learning and worries about the particular learning style of his son to remain focused for such a long amount of time. Not sure how we can keep him focused without constant supervision. Listen, you're not alone. This is a challenging situation for lots of our families. And while we are advocating for primarily synchronous, we certainly want to balance that with some asynchronous. And when a teacher's delivering synchronous, I don't want you to think that a teacher's going to be talking at kids for 45 minutes. That's not the idea. Oftentimes when our teachers deliver instruction, it's for 15 or 20 minutes. Maybe it's 25 or 30. But again, best practice is a somewhat abbreviated lesson and then some opportunity to practice or work with a classmate on a project or an application of what was instructed. And don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can talk through this more on a personal level with you, and we'll figure out how to support you in the situation. But we'll work with you in this case. You're not alone. We'll support with Wilson. We will be providing Wilson, and we'll do everything we can to get our students caught up. Absolutely. Again, this is a question about being able to socially distance students that have IEPs in the same class. And it sounds like from Ms. Aducci, we have the capability of doing that at the high school based on, at least for our full-time special education students to be spread out. We'll do our very best to make sure that we socially distance our students as close to 6 feet as possible. Remember, if they're wearing a mask, it's okay for them to be closer, but we're doing everything we can to maintain that distance.
May I add something, Dr. Russell? I think what we do recognize is that for some of our students with more intensive needs, we know that learning will require, closer contact with the adults. So for example, if they require that hand-over-hand modeling, we'll make sure that our staff is also equipped with the appropriate PPE to keep everyone safe. The use of plexiglass dividers, the use of face shields, those types of things. So just recognizing that we want to keep everyone safe, but we also recognize that sometimes those distances will be closer than 6 feet in terms of the instructional pieces.
Okay, great, thank you. So here we have a child that is supplemental, only goes to specials like art and music. All of her learning is in her support class, but she would only be a 4-day schedule. Is that correct? Or would she be a 5-day? We might have to talk more about that on an individual level. We can talk to you, if you would reach out again, not sure where your child attends, but reach out to either Dr. Gibbons or Mrs. Christofko. They can walk you through that. We can learn a little bit more about the situation and then give you a more complete answer. But we'll absolutely consider these circumstances. And I'm aware in this next message, I'm aware that lots of us have some anxiety and fear about sending our children into the school setting where there will be lots of students. And so the question is, with both parents serving as essential workers, that this child can only be on the computer after we get home from work because of the level of support needed. So what would be the option if we decide to go back all virtually, I think is the question. We have some ideas on how we might support families in these situations. We're still in conversations about those, but again, you're not alone with this particular challenge. So stay tuned. I don't want you to think I'm sort of copping out on this, but we are talking about ways to support families who work during the day and can't support their children in a virtual environment. So stay tuned. We'll give you some more information about that. We're taking notes on these questions too. So is the curriculum pace for high school students the same as an everyday 5-day in class versus hybrid or all virtual? Will the school calendar be adjusted to limit scheduled off days and half days? Right now, we're hoping to move our curriculum along at the pace we typically move it along. It's probably going to be a little different, at least in the beginning, until we get into our rhythm. However, the idea would be that we get through our curricula. Again, it's just going to be via a different model, either some days in class, other days virtual, or all virtual. So our goal is to get through the curricula. Will the school calendar be adjusted? Too early to say. That's always a possibility. Right now, today, we haven't made an adjustment or recommended that. As a district, have we considered providing 100% virtual instruction, not to be compared to emergency virtual instruction from the spring? I appreciate you emphasizing that. Thank you. Any virtual instruction that we offer in the upcoming year will be different from the spring. And I know you've heard us say that. We're really focused on that though. And we really want to improve the service. But we'll still have buildings open for special education students to come and receive services, supports on an individual, safe and scheduled basis. Yes, that is true. So if we go 100% virtual, we are still recommending that some of our special education students come in to receive their services. And it'll be safe. We'll be wearing our PPE. We'll be upholding those guidelines we know mitigate the spread of the virus. That is our goal right now. How quickly can an IEP revision meeting take place once a plan for the school year is approved? So, and then also the question here is, my student's a senior and will need a new evaluation to qualify for services in college. So again, that's a good question to ask your case manager about in terms of timing. And the timing for these meetings is going to be dependent upon, first of all, if we're in a position to have our plan approved Thursday night. So our board will be presented a plan. I'll be talking to them about these plans that need their approval. One is the health and safety guidelines plan, and the other one is how we're going to offer instruction, reopening schools and the instructional models. Right now, they're scheduled to be approved Thursday night. So if that occurs, then we can start to get the wheels in motion to schedule any IEP revision meetings. If you bring special education students back full time, will they all be going to their current school or will they attend school in the same building like ESY? Oh, that's a good question. If we're all virtual, I'm stumped. I don't know that we've thought this one through. So we need to get back to you on this, Mrs. Hills. Great question. because it may be more efficient to have them in one building, although we don't want the numbers to get too large. So stay tuned on that one. We're going to jot that down and we'll get back to you on that. That's a great question. It's more efficient for us to offer with resources and having the buildings up and running ESY in one building. I'm not sure we're going to do that in the school year. Transportation will be provided for all of our students who are brought to school and then taken home. Okay, what would it look like for a student who's in the itinerant model switch to those classes from their regular ed classes? I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure I understand the question completely. Anybody on the panel have some ideas here? So it sounds like maybe we're switching from itinerant, pull out, instead of attending the regular ed classes. Again, that would be an IEP team decision. We would need to talk that through. So that's an important question. I would encourage you to reach out to one of the special ed supervisors, depending upon the grade level of your child. And again, Dr. Gibbons is Skipback, Schwanksville West. Mrs. Christofko is South, Evergreen East. Ms. Aducci is the high school. Okay, so this question is, if you're saying that special ed students are allowed in the building 2, 4, or 5 days a week, depending upon their individual support plans, whether PV does virtual voyage or hybrid, what happens if Governor Wolf shuts down the school? Am I correct in assuming they will not be allowed in the building? I think we would need the specifics of a shutdown before I can answer that question accurately. And again, we're striving to work with our special education students. Again, we would need to know the details of any kind of shutdown order from Governor Wolf before we can answer that. But again, we're going to note that question and we'll make sure we follow up in the event any kind of announcement like that is made. Okay, some children have symptoms related to their disability, may also be on the list of symptoms for COVID. Will they need to self-quarantine if they present, or will there be an exception? Really important question. This is where Mrs. Lewis is really helpful. You know, we know that some of the symptoms that are on the list of our self-monitoring questionnaire are the same symptoms that can be innocent allergy symptoms and not or unrelated to COVID. So what would you say here, Mrs. Lewis? How will we navigate when students present with some of the same symptoms that are on our list?
So that is a great question, and it is one of our concerns and one of the concerns for the nurses across the building. Fortunately, I say all the time, we're very lucky to have a certified school nurse in every building, and hopefully your child's school nurse knows your child and has a very good working relationship with you, because it is going to be on a case by case. We are going to have to do that symptom monitoring. I think one of the key takeaways could be is that fever. And we did change that fever requirement. We as a district are usually pretty conservative at 100, but the guidelines are at 100.4. And so we did decide to go ahead and be on the same page as the county and as the local healthcare providers, family providers. So I think that will be a key takeaway. Do they have that fever? It will be case by case. It'll be working with you and your provider. As I said, not everyone who gets sent to the provider is going to be tested based on their symptoms, especially if there's a history of certain symptoms. So, hopefully we'll be able to work through any concerns that you have with that and not just constantly be sending students for testing and for quarantine. Well, one of just to add on to that, I think one of the questions that will be asked if your child is presenting with symptoms is, have you been around anyone? Where have you been? Have you been out of state? Has anyone that known to you been tested positive or quarantined themselves? So there's other questions that involve that contact tracing that is, not just specific to those symptoms as well.
Very helpful. Thank you. Moving on, does the district actually believe there will be substitutes available fair question. Substitutes tend to be pretty difficult to secure. We're not sure what to expect in the upcoming year. However, it is something that we're focused on and thinking about how we might mitigate. So it's a fair question if we have teachers that are out or become sick. If my child's in school full-time, where would they eat lunch? So we're making accommodations in lunch. And we've got the elementary schools pretty well figured out. We've got the middle schools in pretty good shape. We're going to spread kids out so that they're more distant because they can't eat with masks on. So they really do need to be 6 feet apart. And we're shifting students from eating lunch in the cafeteria all the time to some other areas in the building. We may stagger start times so that we can get kids through their lunch in the ways that we need to. So we're going to spread students out and use other spaces in the building to do that. We may also move desks into cafeterias as opposed to tables, and then we can situate those desks 6 feet apart. If somebody is interested in PV virtual, the question is, how do I choose that? And I'm going to recommend that you reach out to Mr. Ryan Stanson-Marsh at the high school or Mrs. Laurie Smith here in central office, either one. And if you're not familiar with either of those individuals, please send me an email and I'll connect you with them. Happy to do that. Now, Mrs. Lewis, this is another question for you, although I don't know if she left. If a student is tested positive, are you saying everyone has to stay home for 14 days? This is confusing. When are we told there's a problem? Again, this depends upon what the Office of Public Health directs, and they will conduct the contact tracing. And that may or may not mean everyone in the class has to quarantine. I see did Mrs. Lewis leave us? She's back.
She's back to Russell.
Thank you.
Sorry, I got knocked off. I apologize.
Oh,
Could you repeat that question?
Okay. Yeah, the question is, if a student is tested positive, are you saying that everyone has to stay home for 14 days? This is confusing. And I know this question's been posed to us before. And when are we told?
Yeah,
when do we inform our community that there's a problem, that somebody's tested positive?
Right, so that will be that Office of Public Health. It's under their direction. They'll be the ones probably to get the testing back first. They often notify us, and that's not unusual. This is, when any type of contagion is in the community. Pertussis is one that comes up that we get, seem to get every year. So we work with the Office of Public Health, and then they do, they'll do the contact tracing, they'll have those conversations, and then they'll provide us with the direction. It will not be our decision to who gets quarantined or who, for however many days and how many people get quarantined. That will be the decision of the Office of Public Health.
Okay. And a follow-up question is, will temperature checks occur daily at school or before boarding a bus?
And, we've talked about that in depth in many of our task force meetings. And the guidance is really that is not something that's feasible and reliable. The most important thing that parents can do in working as our partners is to do that symptom monitoring questionnaire that we'll certainly provide to to families and to students. And and as Dr. Russell said, coaching and educating families and students as to what that question monitoring looks like. So that really is going to fall on the responsibility before a student even gets on a bus or gets dropped off at school. We really don't want anyone coming into the building with any of those symptoms.
Okay, so there's a question about live streaming from a classroom that could lead to a breach in confidentiality, or maybe even a parent at home observing some things that raise questions and violate the confidentiality of another student. So right now, that's a really good question and something that we're thinking about with live streaming. Right now, we're going to set norms. That's our plan. And we would mute the video. The focus is on the lesson, not the people. So even the teacher doesn't necessarily have to be visible if that's the preference on the part of the teacher. So we need to talk more about that. But in the short answer is that we will establish norms and we will request a lot of video muting, if not for everyone. This is a good question too that's come up. Should we run the hybrid with Group A coming Monday, Tuesday and Group B Thursday, Friday? So Wednesday could serve as a cross-contamination deep clean, because then we won't be alternating the students. That's come up to us. And I think probably one of the hesitations around committing to that, because you point out a real advantage to that Monday, Tuesday, and then Thursday, Friday. A disadvantage is viewed as the break in time from being in school for some of our students. So the idea of the Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, still we believe allows us to meet those cleaning protocols, and it keeps kids kind of engaged in the school setting without that longer break. But this isn't ruled out. It's not off the table. So know that that's been brought up and we're thinking about that too. So this is a good question, the logistics. If a student chooses 100% virtual, will special education be in the building? And if so, will they be doing the virtual learning with the regular ed students just in the actual building? We're still sort of working through this. It's very possible that if we deliver 100% virtual, that our teachers would do that from the building. So chances are that if your child comes into school and is learning virtually, he or she would have some additional supports because there would be staff present. Again, we're working out the details of that. That's the idea. We want to make sure we support our special education students effectively. Good. So this parent is giving some positive feedback. Excellent. And if you have follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to let me know what they are, or any of us on the panel. Okay, so this question is about special education students attending 4 days a week as Group A and B members. They would only receive new instruction and activities if all classes are live streamed. So our plan is that a teacher would deliver that instruction through Zoom or through a Google Meet. So it won't necessarily be via YouTube or Facebook Live. Are teachers able to monitor and teach their students in the building and online simultaneously? We recognize this could be a real challenge, which is, again, something we want to call out and emphasize and support our teachers on. And those norms, those expectations for behavior are something that we're trying to articulate so that we support our teachers and we support our students in these different environments. Different way of doing school. We have to think differently, and that may mean some different rules and some different norms, as I keep referring to them. We're still working on that with our teachers. Do we have the appropriate tech, bandwidth, Wi-Fi, et cetera, to support live streaming in every single classroom at the same time? That's a good question. I think we're working to upgrade our bandwidth. I know our Chief Information Officer is on the line. So Mr. Ganesh, I'll let you pipe in here if that's okay.
Sure. So yes, we are working to upgrade our bandwidth to almost 10-fold. We are at this point at 1 gig. As a right immediate step, we're going to go to 2 gig and even possibly even more. So that's happening in the next few weeks. So we are expecting an increase in the usage, and we are taking precautionary steps to accommodate the increase.
Thank you, Mr. Ganesh. Will parents be responsible for materials needed for hands-on projects and crafts? We're going to do our best to provide you with the resources that we typically or otherwise would provide you with. In a virtual setting, that might be a little bit different, and we may actually shift in the sorts of projects that we engage your children with. So stay tuned for that. We want to provide resources to the degree possible, no matter whether it's hybrid or virtual. So there'll be more conversation about this. We know that some of the projects our students engage in this year to support their learning may look different from the projects of the past. If we have students who can't wear a mask, we are thinking about the accommodations to support them. So if a student can't wear a mask, that student needs to maintain that 6 feet of social distance. And again, we'll coach our students on that. We'll coach our teachers. And just as students with a broken leg are left out of class a few minutes early to get to the next class to avoid the crowds in the hallway or to use the elevator, we're thinking the same accommodation would be afforded to a student who can't wear a mask due to a medical condition. We are working on other ideas to accommodate students who, because of a medical condition, can't wear a mask. If a face shield is more appropriate and can be worn successfully, we would recommend that. That offers some level of protection, not to the degree of a face covering, but it does offer some level of protection. So a couple of those types of accommodations are the ones that we're considering. So if you have a specific question about your child and the 2 or 4 days because of a recent change in disability category or from full-time supplemental to itinerant, please reach out to your case manager or any one of the supervisors on our screen. That would be really helpful. Okay, so I think we answered the question about students who cannot wear a mask and also require hand-over-hand instruction right next to an adult. I think we talked about that. We have some ways that we're going to try and support, and we're going to morph some of those older strategies and accommodate in this new environment. So we will work with our students who, because of a medical condition, can't wear a mask. And again, one accommodation is maintaining that distance. The other is maybe offering a face shield. And we can talk more about that on a personal level. Okay. What do we do about phys ed and health? Okay, so good question. What do we do at school about phys ed and health? This is a high school student. And we're thinking about that a lot and thinking about getting students outdoors as much as possible for phys ed. Health would be similar to the way your other classes would run. Numbers in the class, number of students in the class would be lower, and students would be further apart and they would wear masks. For phys ed, what we're advocating for is, first of all, no contact sports and to get our kids outside as much as possible. Now, if it rains or snows, that's a problem. But that's what we're thinking. Ms. Aducci, did you want to add anything else to that? Any other ideas?
No, I know that once the schedules are out, and that could be in the next couple weeks at the high school, once they finalize schedules, we'll be able to really dig deep into the numbers and determine how to best schedule for our students and what areas that we can use to accommodate the numbers within the, specifically within the physical education classes. As far as health goes, they'll be following the same social distancing guidelines, such as a social studies or science or any other class would be.
Okay, great, thank you. Will accommodations be made for gifted students? Absolutely. GIEPs will be implemented and upheld, no doubt. And a question or an expression of thanks to the special ed teachers and staff for recognizing the importance of meeting the needs of our special education students by coming into the buildings. We want to offer that in-building instruction, regardless of whether we're hybrid, virtual, whatever. And this is thanks to our special ed team and our special ed staff. And we appreciate you expressing that, Mrs. Mares. How will labs be handled for high school students? And if a student's in orchestra, how will that be handled? This is assuming students are attending virtual. Good question. We are working with Mr. Overholzer and the other music teachers about how to move music forward. And we know that there can be some virtual lessons and some separate ensemble rehearsals, but in the school setting, this is a real challenge. Virtually, it takes coordination and is probably a little bit easier to sing anyway when you're not in that larger group, but we're still working on how to actually provide students the learning experiences in the music areas that we're used to providing them. And labs, I mentioned, if you're talking about science labs, many of them will move to virtual if we're in a virtual environment, and there will be less hands-on. In the hybrid environment, we'll still do some hands-on labs. In the virtual, if we're in a fully virtual, we'll look to some of those virtual labs. And there are some pretty good ones out there on the internet. I'm glad you brought up North Montco, the tech school. So thanks for doing that. I meant to point that out in the presentation. We are planning to provide North Montco attendance and transportation to get to the tech school from home and back from the tech school to school or home. So more to come on that, but we will provide your child the opportunity, regardless of choosing a hybrid or a virtual model, we'll provide your child the opportunity to go to the tech school 5 days a week, and we'll provide that transportation. If a child shows up off the bus presenting with a fever, again, we need to investigate that. We need to follow that algorithm, and the Office of Public Health will be notified, and they in turn will notify the appropriate families, and as they conduct that contact tracing on the bus. Yeah, this is a good question. PE requirements for high school credits. How will they be addressed if the students are virtual? And I think that will become very creative for our students from our staff. And there may be some more independent or digital workouts that are organized for our students. So stay tuned for that. But we're going to support students meeting the credit requirements set forth. And again, particularly for our seniors who are looking forward to graduating at the end of the school year. We're going to get creative with how we offer some of the instruction and get through the curriculum. We have considered virtual classroom platforms other than Google Classroom. We're not interested in switching to a different learning management system at this point in time. However, we do like Zoom for the ability to interact with students, and we are seriously thinking about that and a subscription for our staff because it has stronger features. And this is a thanks. I appreciate the thanks. Yes, if a student is working from home in a virtual setting, we will work to provide all supports that are afforded through the IEP. And again, we'll work with you more on a personal level to make sure that happens. Okay, there were issues with students on their Chromebooks accessing Zoom. Has this been tested on student Chromebooks? Is it just a setting that can easily be changed? I don't know, Mr. Ganesh, if you're aware of that. There were issues with students logging into Zoom from the Chromebooks.
Initially, there were some issues with the Chrome extension, the Zoom extension itself for the Chromebooks. But since then, Zoom has released a much more stable extension, and that's been working really very well. We've been using Zoom on a Chromebooks almost on a daily basis. So that's been working out very well and it's been tested extensively. So we expect to Zoom work pretty smoothly on a Chromebook.
Thank you, Mr. Ganesh. Here's another thanks to all the teachers, the admin staff, and the board for taking the time to explain all the options, keeping everybody's needs in mind. Tough decisions. Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Dave. How will PV handle special classes like music? I think I just mentioned that. Those are tricky, and we're working through some ways that we might be able to engage our students in those musical learning experiences that we know are really important to a lot of our kids, keep them engaged in school. We'll get creative, but we want to continue to offer those learning experiences. They just may look different. And this is a thanks for the time. And we really appreciate being able to speak to our special education families directly like this. This ended up being a little bit longer than I like. I did a lot of the talking. You may have some further questions or comments. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And there will continue to be communication. Tomorrow night, we're going to take a deeper dive into virtual learning, and we'll really go through the details of that. You may want to tune in tomorrow night again. If you're at home, not doing anything, feel free. And then Thursday night is the school board meeting where, again, there will be in-depth conversations about our health and safety plan, as well as the instructional models we offer when we reopen schools. So lots of information being put out this week and opportunities for you as parents to engage with us. So please don't hesitate in any follow-up to reach out to me or any one of us on the panel. We'd really appreciate being able to address your questions. And thanks for tuning in tonight. Stay safe. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.